One plate of food. That is all it took for her life to fall apart. Lisa Carter, a hard-working waitress, noticed a homeless man sitting outside in the freezing cold, staring at the leftover food being thrown away. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking for anything. But she could see it in his eyes. He was starving. She had a choice. Ignore him, like everyone else, or help. Lisa gave him a warm meal, but instead of a thank you, she got fired on the spot, humiliated, thrown out like trash. And the next day, something happened that no one saw coming. The truth shook the entire world. Would you have done the same thing if you knew it could cost you everything? Comment yes if you would have helped. Comment no if you would have walked away. Let's see how many people still believe in kindness. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this one ends. Lisa Carter wasn't just another waitress. She was the kind of person who remembered how people liked their coffee, checked on customers even when she was busy, and always greeted everyone with a warm smile, even when she was exhausted. She worked long shifts at Randall's Diner, making just enough to survive. Life hadn't been easy for her. Growing up in foster care, she never had a stable home, never had anyone looking out for her. She knew what it felt like to be invisible. Maybe that's why, when she saw the homeless man outside the diner that night, she couldn't just look away. Inside the diner, everything was warm and full of life. The smell of grilled burgers filled the air, the coffee machines hummed, and customers laughed over their meals. It was comfortable, safe. But outside, sitting alone on the curb, was an elderly man wrapped in a tattered coat, shivering in the cold. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking for anything. But his sunken eyes followed every plate of food that was being cleared from the tables, food that would soon be thrown in the trash. Lisa felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that kind of hunger. She had felt it before. And at that moment, she had a choice. Ignore him, like everyone else, or do something. What would you have done? Comment help if you would have done the same, or ignore if you would have walked away. Lisa stood near the counter gripping a coffee pot in one hand. But her mind wasn't on her work. Her eyes kept drifting toward the glass door, where the old man sat on the curb. It was freezing outside, the kind of cold that made people walk faster, eager to get inside somewhere warm. Inside the diner, everything was different. The air was filled with the smell of freshly grilled burgers, the sound of clinking coffee cups, and the low hum of conversations. People were comfortable, enjoying their meals, laughing, completely unaware of the man shivering just a few feet away. Lisa had seen him before. He had been sitting outside the diner for the past 3 nights. He never begged, never asked for anything. He just sat there, watching. But tonight, she noticed something different. His eyes weren't just staring at the people walking by. They were locked on the plates of food being cleared from the tables, the food that would soon be scraped into the trash. Her stomach tightened. She knew that look. That kind of hunger wasn't about missing a meal or skipping dinner. It was the kind of hunger that made your hands shake, made your head light, made you feel weak. She knew it because she had felt it before. Growing up in foster care, Lisa had experienced nights where she went to bed with only a glass of water, trying to trick her body into feeling full. She knew what it was like to wonder where her next meal would come from, and now she was watching someone else go through the same thing. She glanced toward the back office, where Mr. Randall was counting the register, like he always did. He had one rule: no freebies, no exceptions. If someone couldn't pay, they didn't eat. Lisa knew what would happen if she broke that rule. But she also knew she couldn't just walk away. She took a deep breath and made up her mind. Moving quickly, she grabbed a plate from the counter. She scooped up mashed potatoes, placed a fresh steak on top, added extra gravy, and grabbed a small bread roll. It wasn't much, but she made sure it was enough. Her hands trembled as she walked toward the door. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every step felt heavier, like she was walking toward something she couldn't undo. She stepped outside, knelt beside the man, and placed the plate in front of him. "Here," she said softly. "Eat." The man looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. His lips trembled as he stared at the food, then at her. His hands shook as he reached for the fork. "Bless you," he whispered. "Bless you, miss." Lisa smiled. At that moment, it didn't matter what the rules were. She had done the right thing. Then a voice rang out behind her. "Lisa!" Her stomach dropped. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see. Mr. Randall stood in the doorway, his face twisted in anger. Behind him, Megan, her co-worker, stood smirking. Lisa's mouth went dry. The diner had gone silent. People had stopped eating. Some whispered to each other while others simply watched. Randall stormed toward her, his footsteps heavy. "What do you think you're doing?" Lisa stood her ground. "He was hungry. You just stole from me," Randall snapped. "That's my food, my business, and you're giving it away for free?" Lisa forced herself to stay calm. It was one plate. We throw away food every night. He needed it. Randall's face turned red. "That's not the point. The point is, you don't make the rules." "I do." Lisa clenched her fists. "So, you'd rather throw food in the trash than let someone eat?" Randall scoffed. "This is not a charity. You feed one, they'll all start coming. Then what? You expect me to feed the whole city?" Lisa shook her head. "Number, I expect you to act like a human being." Randall let out a short, harsh laugh. "You think kindness pays the bills. If he can't afford food, that's not my problem." Lisa turned back to the man, who was staring at the plate, his hands now resting in his lap. He looked embarrassed, like he wanted to disappear. She looked at Randall again, her voice steady. "If this is the kind of place you run, then I don't want to work here." Randall's expression hardened. "Good, because you're fired." A hush fell over the diner. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Fired? Just like that? She had worked here for 3 years, never late, never disrespectful, never caused trouble. And now, because she tried to do the right thing, she was being thrown out like she didn't matter? Her hands trembled as she untied her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. She turned to leave, but before she could step outside, she heard something that made her pause. The homeless man spoke up. "Miss, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Lisa turned to him and squeezed his hand gently. "This isn't your fault." Randall rolled his eyes. "Enough with the drama. Get out." Lisa clenched her jaw, biting back the words she wanted to say. She turned toward the door. And then, something happened that no one noticed at that moment. A woman sitting in the back corner had been watching the whole thing, and she had her phone out, recording. Lisa walked into the cold, the door slamming shut behind her. She had no idea what she was going to do next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Lisa stepped out into the cold, the bitter air hitting her face as the diner door slammed shut behind her. She had just lost her job for doing something good, and yet, inside, people had already moved on. They went back to their meals, back to their conversations, as if nothing had happened. No one stood up for her. No one said a word. She was just another waitress, another worker tossed aside like she didn't matter. But not everyone ignored what had happened. In the corner booth, a woman sat staring at her phone. Her screen was still recording. She had filmed everything. Lisa didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. That night, she lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the scene, Randall yelling, the homeless man looking ashamed, the way she had been humiliated in front of everyone. Was this really how the world worked? Did kindness really mean nothing? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She reached for it and saw a message from an old co-worker. "Lisa, check your phone. You're everywhere." Confused, she opened her social media. Her hands shook as she scrolled. Her name was trending. Someone had posted the video, the clip of her handing the plate to the homeless man, the way Randall had fired her. It had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People were furious. She got fired for feeding a hungry man. Disgusting. Boycott Randall's diner. Where is Lisa now? We need to help her. News channels started picking up the story. Famous influencers were talking about it. People were calling out Randall's cruelty, demanding answers. Randall, who always believed he was untouchable, suddenly had a massive problem. The next morning, Lisa's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, notifications. She could barely keep up. Everything had changed overnight. And then, among the flood of messages, one name stood out. The homeless man. He wasn't just some stranger on the street. He had a name, David Carter. And his story? It changed everything. David reached out asking to meet her. He wanted to talk, to tell her who he really was. Lisa agreed. They met at a small coffee shop, and for the first time Lisa saw him in a new light. He wasn't just a man sitting on the curb. He was someone who had lived, who had lost, who had a story to tell. "I wasn't always homeless," he said, stirring his coffee. His hands still shook, but his voice was steady. "I had a life, a family, a business, but then I lost everything." Lisa leaned in, listening carefully. Years ago, David had been a successful businessman. He had a wife, a young daughter, and a good home. But after a tragic car accident took the lives of his wife and child, his world collapsed. Grief consumed him. He couldn't work, couldn't function. He started drinking to numb the pain, one bad decision after another, and soon he lost his job. His savings disappeared. The house was foreclosed. Friends stopped checking in. And just like that, he became invisible. The worst part? David sighed. People don't even look at you. You stop being a person. They step over you like trash. Lisa felt a lump in her throat. She had spent just one night feeling hopeless. He had been living like this for years. But you... He looked at her, eyes filled with gratitude. "You saw me." Lisa smiled. "Everyone deserves kindness." David nodded. "I want to tell my story. People need to know who I am, not just some homeless guy. Maybe it'll help others too." Lisa agreed to share his words. She pulled out her phone, pressed a record, and let him speak. And just like before, the internet exploded. People weren't just angry at Randall anymore. They wanted to help David. Donations poured in. Offers for jobs, housing, support. People cared. Randall, on the other hand? His diner was dying. Customers stopped coming. His Google reviews plummeted. Reporters were calling, asking for statements. People showed up just to confront him. And then, the final blow, health inspectors arrived. Randall had been cutting corners for years. Expired food, a filthy kitchen, unpaid workers. The diner was shut down. And Lisa? Her life took a turn she never expected. She got a call from a well-known restaurant owner, a man who had seen her story and wanted her on his team. "People like you belong in this industry," he told her. "A better job, a place that valued kindness over greed." Lisa couldn't believe it. She had lost everything. and somehow she'd gained more than she ever imagined. And the best part, David finally had a second chance. With the support pouring in, he found a place to stay, got medical care, and even started working again. He was no longer invisible. Lisa had no regrets. One small act of kindness had changed everything. Lisa had never expected her life to change overnight. One moment, she was just another waitress, struggling to get by. The next, she was at the center of a story that had taken over the internet. People from all over the world were reaching out. Some were offering her jobs. Others just wanted to tell her how much her kindness had inspired them. Strangers were sending donations, not just for her, but for David, the homeless man she had helped. David was no longer invisible. With the money pouring in, he was able to get medical care, a place to stay, and even a chance to start over. For the first time in years, he had hope. But then, something happened that no one saw coming. A journalist, intrigued by David's story, started digging into his past. And what did they find? It left everyone stunned. David Carter wasn't just any man. He was once a millionaire. Before he lost everything, he had owned a chain of businesses employing hundreds of people. He was well known in the business world, respected for his leadership and generosity, but when his wife and daughter died, grief consumed him. He made bad decisions, trusted the wrong people, and within a few years, everything was gone. He had fallen so far that no one even recognized him anymore. But now, the world knew his name again. The internet went crazy. Wait, this man was once a millionaire. This proves anyone can end up homeless. We need to stop judging people. I can't believe people just walked past him every day without knowing who he was. The news spread fast, and suddenly, David wasn't just getting help, he was getting opportunities. Business owners who had once worked with him offered him jobs. Some even wanted to invest in him, to help him rebuild what he lost. And then came the biggest shock of all. A lawyer reached out. Apparently, David had money left in an old account. Money he didn't even know existed. Investments from years ago that had been forgotten. He wasn't just getting back on his feet, he was wealthy again. But instead of keeping it all for himself, David had another idea. He wanted to help others. He started working with local shelters, using his new wealth to support people who were struggling just like he had been. He understood what it felt like to have nothing, and he never wanted anyone to feel that way again. Lisa couldn't believe it. The man she had fed on a cold night was now in a position to change hundreds of lives. One plate of food had set off a chain reaction that led to something bigger than either of them could have imagined. But while David's life was turning around, there was still one person who was losing everything, Mr. Randall. His diner had been closed for weeks now, and people had not forgotten what he did. His business was ruined, his reputation destroyed, and then one day, Lisa got a message. It was from him. He wanted to meet. At first, she didn't know what to think. After everything he had done, after the way he had treated her, why should she listen to anything he had to say? But in the end, she decided to hear him out. They met at a small cafe, one that was packed with people. Unlike his now-abandoned diner, Randall looked tired. The arrogance was gone. The man who once fired her without a second thought now looked like he had nothing left. "I messed up," he admitted. "I let my greed take over. I thought I was protecting my business, but I was really just destroying everything." Lisa didn't say anything. She just let him talk. "I lost everything," Randall continued, "and I know I deserve it. But I wanted to tell you I was wrong. I see that now." Lisa wasn't sure how to respond. She had hated him for what he did. But now, looking at him, she saw a man who had lost everything. Not because of bad luck, not because of a tragedy he couldn't control, but because of his own choices. And maybe that was even worse. Randall took a deep breath. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to make things right. I want to help, however I can. Lisa studied him for a moment. Could people really change? Was he sorry? Or was he just desperate? She didn't know. But she did know one thing. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about what kind of person she wanted to be. So she made a decision. She told him about David's new project, the shelters, the people they were trying to help, and then she gave him a choice. If you really want to make things right, she said, then prove it. Help them. Randall nodded. I will. Did she trust him? Not completely, but everyone deserved one chance to change. And if he was serious, then maybe something good could still come from all of this. Lisa stood up, ready to leave. Before she walked away, Randall looked at her and said something she never expected. Thank you, he whispered, for not being like me. Lisa didn't reply. She just walked out the door, stepping into the future that was now brighter than ever. And just like that, the girl who had once been fired for feeding a homeless man had become the reason thousands of people were getting a second chance at life. Lisa walked out of the cafe, leaving Randall behind. She didn't know if he would keep his promise, and honestly, she didn't care. That part of her life was over. What mattered now was everything that had come out of it. A single act of kindness had started a chain reaction. She had lost her job, but she had gained so much more. She had a new career, one that valued her kindness instead of punishing it. She was working for people who actually cared about others, who believed in doing what was right. And David? He had gone from being ignored on the streets to having a second chance at life. The world knew his name now, but not as just another homeless man. He was someone who had fallen and risen again, someone who had suffered and survived. And instead of just moving on with his life, he chose to help others. Lisa had always believed kindness mattered, but now she had proof. One simple meal had led to so many lives being changed. But the biggest change? It was in her. For years, she had been the girl who followed the rules, who worked hard, kept her head down, and never caused trouble. She had believed that if she just did her job and stayed quiet, things would work out. But that night, outside the diner, she realized something. The world doesn't change when people stay silent. It changes when people stand up. And for the first time in her life, she had stood up for something. She had risked everything, and she didn't regret a single moment. The new diner where she worked had a policy: no one leaves hungry. It didn't matter if someone was struggling. It didn't matter if they didn't have money that day. If they were hungry, they ate. And no one ever got fired for showing kindness. Lisa smiled every time she saw someone walk in, unsure if they could afford a meal, and leave with a full stomach. This was how things should be, and she wasn't alone in thinking that. Because something else had happened that she never expected. People who had seen her story started making changes in their own communities. Other restaurants began adopting the same policy, offering free meals to those who needed them. Shelters got more donations. People started volunteering. It was like a wave of kindness had spread across the world, all because of one plate of food. It was strange to think about how different things could have been if she had ignored David that night. If she had just walked past him like everyone else. If she had done nothing. No one would have ever known his name. She wouldn't have lost her job. Randall's diner wouldn't have shut down. None of this would have happened. But she had made a choice, and that choice had changed everything. Lisa looked back at her journey and realized something even bigger. It wasn't just about David. It wasn't just about Randall. It was about all the people out there who felt invisible, all the people who were struggling in silence, all the people who just needed one person to see them. One act of kindness had created a ripple effect, and maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never ignore someone in need again, and she hoped that after hearing this story, neither would anyone else. This story proves something important. Kindness is never wasted. Lisa could have ignored David that night. She could have walked past him, just like everyone else did. If she had, she wouldn't have lost her job. She wouldn't have been humiliated. But she also wouldn't have changed a life. And not just one life, thousands. Because of her one small act of kindness, David got a second chance. People opened their hearts, their wallets, and their businesses to help him. Because of that one moment, other restaurants changed their policies. More homeless people were fed. More struggling families got help. And Lisa? She lost her old job, but she gained something bigger than she ever imagined. She learned that standing up for what is right is never a mistake, even when it costs you something, even when people turn against you, because in the end, kindness always wins. And now, it's time for you to decide. What would you have done if you were Lisa? Would you have given him food, knowing it could cost you everything? Or would you have walked away? Be honest. Comment yes if you would have helped. Comment no if you wouldn't. If you believe more restaurants should adopt a no one leaves hungry policy, comment feed everyone. Let's see how many people support this. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Share your story in the comments. We're reading every single one. Like if you believe kindness should never be punished. Share this story if you think the world needs more people like Lisa. Because the next time you see someone in need, you might be the one to change everything.